A Spook for Spencer. Written and told by Kiefer Adams. Spencer was a silver streamlined tender engine who belonged to the Duke and Duchess of Boxford. Every year he came to the Island of Sodor, he would always have something new to show off to the other engines. Whether it was an extra coach for his train, a brand new set of lamps, or even the Boxford crest, which the Duke himself had made, Spencer was proud to show it off. Spencer's latest visit had occurred during the fall, and with it, Spencer proudly showed off a more metallic-looking silver coat of paint with white stripes across his boiler. Spencer loved his new coat of paint, and he was like a silver bullet whenever he darted past any of the engines. They were jealous. Spencer's visit had also fallen on Halloween, a spooky time of the year for the engines, filled with ghosts, stories, and things that go bump in the night. That evening, Spencer was at Knapford Yards. Thomas was also there with Annie and Clarabelle. His coaches were being decorated for a trick-or-treating special. Henry, Gordon, Percy and James were there too, waiting for Edward to tell his annual ghost story. Spencer was also being prepared to collect the Duke and Duchess from Kelsthorpe Station, where he would take them, the Fat Controller and his family on a ghost walk. Spencer was not looking forward to the event. "It's just going to be people in costume trying to make a cheap scare out of things," he grumbled. "Well, if you're like this now, I can't wait to hear what you're like at Christmas," snorted James. "I'll pretend I didn't hear that," huffed Spencer. "Shall we pretend that we haven't heard you showing off all week?" asked Percy. "You're a disgrace to this railway," snorted Thomas. "I don't see why the Duke and Duchess keep you with your attitude," added Henry. "I'll have you know, my fine lads, that I am Boxford's finest," thundered Spencer angrily. "I have never been so proud and dignified to be under their services. I have not met another engine like me, nor will I ever do." Gordon had been quiet throughout the whole conversation, but Spencer's last comment had perked him up. "I heard of an engine that was like you," he snorted darkly, "but it wasn't a good outcome." Henry, Thomas, James and Percy stared, and Spencer did too. "What are you on about, Gordon?" "Well," said Gordon, and this was the story he told. Long ago, an engine used to work on the island of Sodor. His shape was similar to Gordon's, but he was longer as he had more driving wheels. The engine also had a scar down its left eye. Many engine will tell you that he gained the scar after a tree hit him when it fell over during a storm after he'd failed to stop. The engine also had a horrid temper. So much so that the engines believed his eyes would beam bright red when he was angry. The engine was like Spencer, always showing off and thinking he knew best and deserved better. One night, he was sent to collect a heavy goods train from the other side of the island. It just so happened to be Halloween night as well, and the engine had promised to return before the crack of dawn. The engine crossed an old stone bridge, but it was not built for an engine of his size. He was halfway across when there was a crumbling sound from beneath. To the engine's horror, the bridge collapsed, taking him with it. When the rescue crews arrived the following morning, there was nothing left of the engine. It was broken and destroyed beyond repair. Some say that on the year of his fateful accident, the engine roams the island, his eyes bright red with anger, and his scar usually the first or last thing that any engine would see if they encountered him. By the time Gordon had finished his story, James, Henry, Percy, Thomas and even Annie and Clarabelle were quite shaken up. But Spencer wasn't. "Honestly, Gordon," he scoffed, "I thought you'd set an example for Gresley, not make a fool of him. Honestly, making such ridiculous stories up." It was lucky for Spencer that it was time for him to leave. Enjoy your night, smirked Henry. Spencer pretended not to hear as he set out onto the main line. That Gordon, he grumbled as he puffed along. He always makes my visits so uncomfortable. Next year I'm bringing that double-tendered brother of his. Perhaps Scotsman could knock some sense into him. Spencer was halfway towards Kelsthorpe when he started going slower. What on earth is going on? He demanded. He went slower and slower before he stopped outside a signal box. His driver got down, followed by the fireman. There's a leak in the pipe of one of your coaches, said the driver. We'll go and sort it. It won't take long. Spencer was about to protest, but his crew had already disappeared between the train. For a while, Spencer was alone. Then the wind began to pick up, and brown and orange leaves started to flutter across the tracks. When the wind died down, Spencer thought he could hear the sound of puffing on the air. Spencer was not sure, but the puffing sounded like the engine's wheels had not been oiled for a long time. It started to get closer. Is that you, Edward? He called. Here to challenge me to another race? But there was no reply. The puffing got closer. I know, said Spencer. It must be Oliver. The Fat Controller might have sent him on a search party for me. But there was still no reply. The puffing was closer now. I know that puffing anywhere, said Spencer, trying to sound brave. It must be my dear Emily. I wonder what she'll make of my silver... He never finished his sentence. Standing before him was a brown tender engine. The first thing Spencer noticed was its angry and aggressive look and its red eyes staring coldly at him. Spencer tried to pluck up courage. See here, my good fellow, he said, I'm in a bit of a situation. If you could just toddle away down the line and just... He trailed away when he saw the scar on the engine's face. No, he gasped. Impossible. You can't be. It isn't possible. What are you?
Your worst nightmare,
bellowed the engine in a rasping hiss. Then it gave a sharp blast of its whistle and covered Spencer from funnel to footplate in steam. Spencer was terrified. At that moment, Spencer's crew returned. What are you playing at, Spencer? Demanded the driver. We could hear you down the back of the train. By this point, Spencer was shaking wildly and his eyes were shut tight. Tell him to go away, he ordered. Tell who to go away? Asked the fireman, confused. Spencer reluctantly opened his eyes. The engine was gone. Never mind, said the driver. The leak in the coaches has been fixed now. We can go and collect the Duke and Duchess. And so they did. The Fat Controller, his wife, his grandchildren, and the Duke and Duchess were waiting for Spencer at Kelsthorpe Station. The Duke placed the crest on Spencer's boiler, and they started their ghost walk. Spencer never said a word. It was dawn the next morning when Thomas arrived at Knapford Sheds to collect Spencer's coaches to be cleaned. Spencer was nearby. Morning, Thomas whistled sweetly. Did you have a good night? Spencer didn't answer. The ghost walk was a success, said Thomas, and you missed a lot of stories at the yards. Edward certainly knows how to tell a good ghost story or two. Spencer still didn't reply. You know the engine from Gordon's story doesn't exist, right? Asked Thomas. No engine of his description has ever worked on our railway. Have a good day, Spencer. And Thomas puffed away with Spencer's coaches. But had Thomas stayed a little longer, he may have noticed the fear in Spencer's eyes. The engine from the previous night was all too real.